Hello, everybody, and welcome along to the Event Industry News podcast with me, James Dixon, wishing you all a very good morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever or wherever you join today's podcast from. And welcome along, everybody. As so often is the case with the podcast, it's first thing on a Monday morning. For whatever reason, that's kind of the pattern that we've fallen into over the years of recording these. So it tends to be sort of a big kick and a wake up to your week when I wake up on a Monday morning and think, right, that's it, podcast head on, get ready to speak to a guest and see where the rest of the week takes us beyond there. And when I woke up this morning, I looked at the notes for today. I thought, right, this is definitely going to be a good one. There's loads of good content to talk about. It's proper event stuff today, talking about stuff that's happening in the UK, in Europe, and indeed globally, with a gentleman who founded and is now the managing director of an events company that's making waves in all of those territories that I just mentioned. I'm delighted to say that joining the Event Industry News podcast for the first time today is the founder, the managing director of Mega Events, Nathan Reed. Nathan, very good morning.
Good morning, James. Yeah, it's really lovely to meet you and to be here. So I'm Nathan, and I created Mega Events. I've been creating and producing shows really since my school days, where I was involved with the school rock show and other events that were appealing to me at that moment in my life, which went on to see me found Mega in my early 20s, almost 15 years ago now. It's fair to say that I got the bug from a very early age, and I've always used it as a tool to kind of satisfy my curiosity and my passions through the medium of events.
And when you said you founded it in your early 20s, let me pick up on that straight away. Was it immediately a full-time endeavor for you? What were you doing sort of prior to the founding of the actual event company?
Sure. So I had actually studied music industries at college, and I'd created a band there. I was the drummer, and I kind of realised that, you know, to get gigs back then, especially given that we weren't the best band of all time, actually it was easier to just create the shows myself. And it was at that moment where I started to take it a bit more seriously, founded a small music festival in my hometown. And from there, I just realized that my hobby could become a business. So pretty much straight out of college, I was always promoting and creating things. It was a few years after that I established it and incorporated it as a company, when I started to realize, oh, okay, you know, actually, this is absolutely a viable business.
And it's interesting because so many people that I have worked with in the events industry have either fallen into it by accident early on, or have come to it later on because they've realized that it's something that tied in very much with stuff that they were doing years before. And that's my own personal experience, is that I came to the events industry when I was 30 years old, having worked in advertising, but realized that in a very similar way to what you've just said, I remember going back to 15 years old and playing in bands, and I was always a kid in school that people would run to say, we don't know how to work this amp, or we can't plug this in, how do we do it? And I'd help them out. And I realized that kind of like 2 decades later, I'd gone back to effectively doing what I was doing in my teenage years, but at a much more sophisticated level and actually getting paid to do it. So it's interesting that you studied the business side of things, went down the sort of the performing route, and then realized that this is where your, I guess, skill set and passion lies. And given that all of those things, do you think that as a founder of a business, as an entrepreneur, that's made things easier to an extent for you, given that this sounds like something that is also a passion project as well as something that you want to push as a business?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the breadth of skills and disciplines that are involved in creating events is huge. It's everything from the most boring, banal side of business, right the way through to conceptualizing and producing shows and making media that you think that the public will really enjoy and connect with, and ultimately that you love yourself as well. So a long, a kind of big, long meandering journey through the event space. I've found so many of these different disciplines just pulling together to form what the company is today.
And out of the actual organisation of the company, if listeners, and if you're watching this podcast today, after you've finished listening to this, go and check out their website, and we'll do all the usual stuff at the end where we'll put the website up, etc., etc. And when I did that at the back end of last week, actually ahead of today's recording, there are 3 distinct kind of brands, I suppose, that are listed on your website, which are the Rock Orchestra, the Illuminated Orchestra, I think it is, and then the Silent Discos in Amazing Spaces. But if we just go back a little bit further, has it been those from the very beginning, or what type of events shaped the early part of mega events?
Sure. So I think as I was saying, for me to some degree, this has always been a medium for bringing to life things that I'm interested in. And as you get older, your interests and your passions change, and different types of events become interesting to you. So in my early days, we were doing a lot of electronic music, raving. Actually, when all of my friends went to university, I didn't go. I had decided that I wanted to go out by myself. And so the first thing that made sense for me to do en masse, and the first time I cracked a kind of national touring brand, was the big Freshers Icebreaker, which was, in all honesty, quite a disruptive concept at the time, because universities had a monopoly on their own Freshers events.
Yeah.
And we created an intercollegiate Freshers event, which sat outside of the scope of the universities, that anybody could attend that was going to university in that location. And that was my first taste of taking something from a local level to a full national rollout, and that took 2 or 3 years. And we stayed in the clubbing space probably for the next 5 years. And in all honesty, at the time, it was kind of hard to see beyond that. It was just so big and important to us. I rolled out brands like Foreverland, which toured really extensively, did some really iconic venues, and then started to segue more into actual shows. So things like Festival of the Dead. We had a few years of running food and drink festivals, again, scaling across the country. So the Great British Gin Festival, Rum and Reggae. And slowly over time, understanding the potential and scalability of different event concepts, before kind of understanding that actually there are much bigger markets out there than the clubbing industry. If you can create a show that can sell on a Tuesday night in Swindon, then you've got a show that you can probably tour 4 or 5 nights a week right the way across the whole of the UK, and do 70 or 80 shows a year. And that then became the framework through which we now judge all of our concepts. We are making sure that when we're conceptualizing, that we're only going for products that are highly scalable, that have great potential in terms of their distribution, being both able to work in the regions, but also internationally as well. So whereas 5 or 6 years ago, a big tour for us would have been like 20 shows. Now a big tour for us is 200 shows for a single concept within a year. And that's how it's evolved over time.
It's interesting that the concept of a tour, because I mean, I've got a very, very good friend of mine tours with a theatre rock show, and we'll get onto the Rock Orchestra in a bit, because it's an amazing concept, and the stuff that I've looked at fascinates me. But yeah, the idea of it being a tour, when it is a concept like this, it's ongoing. Presumably every year you're booking dates, and you're booking dates for every year. When does it just become part of the business model and stop being a tour, if that makes sense. Because a tour, in its sort of traditional sense, feels like it's got a start date and an first day at the tour, last day at the tour. When I look at some of the concepts that you're continually pushing out there, like the Rock Orchestra, it seems to be an ongoing thing.
Absolutely, yeah. They're rolling tours, I guess, is how you would describe them, and that never stops. I mean, the way that we try and think about it is that the larger your distribution network is, the more powerful each concept can be,
Mhm.
and if inherently, if the economics of that event aren't good, it just ultimately means you've got more money to invest back into your product to make the best product possible.
Sure.
Um, so it gives you an advantage over other shows if you have proved up a really huge distribution network globally for each concept, because then your revenue is higher. Also, just over the course of doing so many shows, you're able to iterate in a way where you can really iron out any issues with your show and constantly try to improve it.
Mm.
So to try and answer your question a bit more directly, yes, they're kind of perpetual touring concepts.
Yeah. Which in some respects is even more difficult than a finite tour that has, a start date and an end date. At least you can plan within that particular window. When it's constantly ongoing, that in some respects you're continually talking to venues. There's no sort of end point to it. It is literally an ever evolving, like the universe. It's ever expanding.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's honestly, in terms of the production side of the business and ensuring that everything remains super organized and on time, it's a huge task. But the thing that it does do for us, which I think is really advantageous, is that it allows us to forecast our business really well, because we're able to say with a high degree of confidence, okay, well, this is going to do 200 shows next year. This one's going to do 150. Um, Being led always by the data.
Mhm.
And actually, uh, the difficulty of managing rolling tours is more than offset by our ability to be able to kind of stand on the shoulders of what we've been doing year on year and forecast properly.
Now, let's actually get into the specifics of, first of all, the Rock Orchestra, if we can, because if I'm right in saying, certainly it seems the perception that I get from looking at your information as a business and about the Rock Orchestra is that it's perhaps the biggest entity that you're dealing with within mega events at the moment. Tell us specifically what it is, because I'd love to then get into some of the specifics about how this is all managed in-house, because I think that's a really unique part of your business.
Yeah. Um, I mean, in its simplest form, the Rock Orchestra is a band of classical musicians reimagining the rock and metal genres. Um, and this is in a really distinct visual world. So we have these awesome kind of gothic stage sets and candles and everything. And it was created. So I mentioned to you that I was in a band at college, and in particular, I was in a band with a really good friend of mine, Mill Wakeling, who's a cellist, and we were in a rock band. And when I was conceptualizing the idea for the Rock Orchestra, she'd gone on to become a professional cellist with some of the most notable orchestras throughout the UK. And I said, oh, I've got this idea. I'd love to create a small chamber orchestra playing rock and metal. And she was like, you've called the right person. And we made it happen.
That's amazing, because instantly I can hear the opening riff to Enter Sandman being played in a in a baroque style,
Yeah.
which is amazing. So you've got the Rock Orchestra, and as you've explained, it is to an extent what it says on the tin. It's rock and metal music, classic songs played by an orchestra with all those arrangements. But as I mentioned when I sort of opened this bit of the line of inquiry, is that this everything is managed in house by Mega Events and your team, isn't it? And this is quite, I guess, a unique element to the way that your business is managed is that you conceived, I guess, dealt with sorting out things like musical arrangements, production, stage production. You gave us a snippet there of how it looks visually. So give us, if you may, a bit of an overview about when we say everything's handled in-house by your team, how does that actually manifest itself?
Sure. I mean, at the beginning of creating any new concept, we're looking, we go through a really intense testing phase where what we're doing is we're qualifying demand for a product. I think that process is quite unique to us, and we have about 6 or 7 different data points that we're looking at to identify ultra compelling demand for anything that we're going to work on. So a concept's got to jump through a lot of hoops for us to go, right, we're going to produce this now. With the Rock Orchestra in particular, I still work on that as the artistic director, and I'm completely wedded to it on an emotional level. It's my favorite thing I've ever done. And so designing the stage, working with arrangers and producers to create the sound world and the palette, because I'm such a huge fan of that music in itself. That came really naturally to me because I know what felt satisfying for me when I was listening to it. And so from a creative perspective, even down to the wardrobe and designing of the masks, I've been able to be involved with almost 100% of it, which is awesome. And that is working alongside and forming a team of extremely talented people. Our arranger, Julian Hinton, produced for Seal and Robbie Williams. And I think almost every single classical musician in the band has got a roster of artists they've performed for that, you'd be seriously impressed by. So once we have then created the show and the music, then it's about taking it to market, and all of our marketing happens in-house. Having control of that process from top to bottom means that we're in the driving seat of what we want to do. And it's why we can go from a standing start to, in year one of a show, rolling out anywhere between kind of 50 and 60 shows, sometimes as many as 100 in the first year. If we find something that is really compelling, the show is then great, and we feel like the way is cleared for us to put our foot to the metal and just absolutely go for it. The part of the journey that we work with third parties on is then in terms of the production crew.
Sure.
And we'll link up with various suppliers there who help us, and they work pretty autonomously on the road to continue the touring productions and execute the shows.
And it's fascinating because and this might sound like a really weird connection to make, but when I was reading about this, I immediately thought of an American artist who some people may have heard of, a guitarist called Joe Bonamassa, who has kind of bucked the trend of the music industry. He plays not necessarily really niche music, but it's blues rock. He knows his audience. And one thing that he's kind of made a career of in the last 10, 15 years is he realized that he wasn't going to get any support from the major promoters. He wasn't really going to get any support from the major record labels. And so he took things back to its sort of simplest form, which is booking venues himself, selling the tickets himself, bringing all the production in-house, carrying his own monitoring rig and core crew, and picking up locals when he tours, and predominantly it's in North America, but he does dates over here. But he kind of, there's documentaries that you can watch on this guy, and he very much bucked the trend by doing everything in-house and not relying on third-party promoters, third-party ticketing agencies. And when I was reading about you guys, I immediately made this connection, even though it might sound a bit weird to connect you guys to an American blues rock guitar player. But if you know the guy, and I can see you nodding there, Nathan, there are similarities there between you and him, I think.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think if you know what you want and you can plan a route how to get there, nobody's going to care as much about what you do as you do. And I just think to put yourself in the driving seat, make a plan and go for it, is just really valuable, and it
Mm,
feels really good to be in that position rather than to feel like we're dependent on third parties forming a major part of our process.
mm.
Um, and in terms of what that's allowed us to achieve with our brands and our scale, I would say that's probably the defining reason.
Hmm. And from a ticketing point of view, if I read this right, in terms of the amount and the volume of tickets that you're doing, you're Eventbrite's one of Eventbrite's biggest kind of customers, clients, users now in the EMEA sort of geographical region. Is that right?
Yeah, we're the biggest promoter on Eventbrite outside of North America now,
Wow.
which is cool. Yeah.
I mean, it's a pretty good stat to be able to show, considering when one thing that we've not mentioned is that the Rock Orchestra started in 2020.
Yeah.
So it started probably in the most difficult period of time that the live entertainment industry's ever had.
Yeah, it did. But actually, I think that being in that position, which was not easy for anybody in the events industry, put us in a really difficult situation that we had to plot our way out of. And actually, one of the reasons that we were interested in creating the Rock Orchestra is because it would work socially distanced. And the
Mm.
first ever shows that we ran, it was actually, there were still restrictions on events, and everyone was spaced 2 seats apart. And
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but it's amazing when you put in those kind of circumstances what you can create.
And how, as it's grown, and forgive me, we're kind of dwelling a little bit on the Rock Orchestra, and there are other elements to Nathan's business that we'll get into in a second. But in terms of the musicians, when you're bringing in an orchestra of musicians, you're dealing with not just a 3 or 4 or 5 piece rock band. It's probably a bigger physical lineup in terms of the amount of musicians that are involved in the Rock Orchestra. Getting them to buy into the concept. You want a high level of musician to deliver a high quality content show,
Yeah,
and getting them to buy into what is at the start a concept, and effectively, I suppose, commit people's diaries to that from a financial point of view, and just from any point of view, getting that commitment from them must be maybe not a struggle, but they have to be confident that what they're about to put in their diaries and solidify is going to work.
of course, yeah, and the caliber of musicians that we want to work with, of course, they've got to make sure that they're working on the right projects.
Mhm.
And I think that perhaps actually one of the things that helped us in the early stages, launching in COVID, is there was not much else going on. So
Yeah.
I think people kind of took a bit of a leap of faith. But then as the project's gotten bigger and bigger and bigger, I think collectively between the two socials now, it's around 500,000 followers it has. And the songs that we've been putting out have been really well streamed, and are on kind of our zombie releases on 10 million plus streams in the first 6 months. And what's happened is the gravity and the pull of the project has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger, and people take it quite seriously now. And I hope that it's an accolade for them to be playing on the show. It's certainly a real pleasure for us when these really high caliber musicians come and do their thing. It's always incredible to watch.
And I guess just to sort of wrap up this little segment on the Rock Orchestra, I guess that by maintaining and delivering all those elements that you've touched on so far in terms of the quality, the visual aspect of it, the caliber of the musicians, and going back to the business model, if you can call it that, of doing stuff during a weekday where people can come, sit and enjoy a fantastic show. All of this must equate to returning. I guess a lot of the audiences that are that are coming year on year are returning customers. They've seen it once, they've said, wow, what a great show, I can't wait for it to return next year and I'll buy my ticket again, which is where your sort of foundation can build from.
Absolutely. It was really an amazing moment when we kind of realized, like, wow, this has got fans.
Yeah.
And we get people that will actually follow the tour around. So if we're on, you know, a 40, 50-day tour of the UK, some people will go to 7 or 8 shows, which is just
That's
so
commitment.
cool. It's commitment, yeah. And I know for a lot of the singers and the players in the band, they get a lot of fanfare from it. It's really lovely, actually, to be able to take these ultra talented people and put them front and center. You find in the classical world that often they're accompanying someone and they're off to the side of the stage, or they're in a huge 60-piece orchestra. But in the rock orchestra, they are the rock stars. So they are absolutely, the limelight is on them, and I think you get to see them in a whole new light.
Absolutely, and I said we also touch on some of the other elements that you've got going on, because it's not just the Rock Orchestra that's promoted and run within mega events. Well, first of all, you were Promoter of the Year at the Access All Area Awards in 2023. So you've been scooping awards for the work that you're doing. But I mentioned early on that you've got things like the Silent Discos in Incredible Places. You've also got the Illuminated Orchestra. Let's look at the silent disco element of it in incredible spaces. Let's talk about some of those spaces, and I'm sure everybody's familiar with the silent disco concept, but again, rightly or wrongly, I'm assuming that the unique part of this is the incredible spaces bit.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, if you were going to see a silent disco advertised in your local nightclub, I don't think you'd be too compelled to go. It was utilizing the silent disco format to access buildings that you would never ever be allowed to run a party in. And there's something about that silent disco concept which perceivably to these venues who naturally are extremely protective over their buildings and their spaces, because we're dealing with some absolutely iconic buildings, that is just much more friendly and low impact. But it strikes this emotional chord in people where they see it pop up and they're like, can you imagine going to that building and having a silent disco in there? That's going to be so cool. And that's the filter through which we select our venues, is like, if it doesn't strike that chord, it won't sell.
Sure.
And that's seen us go to some really, beautiful places.
From a production aspect, if I may, I don't want to get too crass and talk specifically about costs and prices and everything, but whilst there is still a cost involved in bringing in high quality, headsets for the audiences, and for clarity, anybody who's worked in this space before and dealt with the wireless headsets and the silent disco companies that are out there are good providers or bad providers in terms of the quality of the headset. So first things first, you've got to have good gear. But all that said and done, if you're hosting a traditional electronic, music event in a space for 2,000 people, in terms of the sound system that you need, the audio system that you need, and getting it in there, rigging it, setting it, tuning it, all of those things that go with that, and the cost that's involved in it, doing it with the headsets doesn't just give you the opportunity to work in here in these amazing spaces, but from a cost point of view, it must change things considerably.
Yeah, it's much more cost effective, and that allows us to make that ticket slightly cheaper. The main costs for us are protecting the venue's infrastructure of just operating the show. We try and really just work with the building and the architecture to illuminate all of it. So there's a lot of lighting that goes into the shows. We also have kind of like a live interactive measure behind each. So you have 3 DJs. And behind each of them is kind of this thermometer of the percentage of people who are currently tuned into their channel.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
We were able to gamify it somewhat, and then if anybody maxes out and everyone goes onto that channel, there's sparks come out the top of their thermometer, which is
Yeah.
But yeah, it is not a particularly high cost event to run, and as I said, it's really kind of low impact, and it just works with the kind of architecture of the building that we're in.
Yeah, and it is, again, it's simple, but like so many of the great event concepts, simplicity is often the key to them, isn't it? You know, it's a relatively simple concept, but like you said, by being able to do this in spaces that otherwise, if you went to approach some of the spaces you're working with and said we want to host a, you know, a party for 1,000 people and bring in all of this equipment and, you know, the electrics that are required then to run audio systems and the vibrations that causes in some of these buildings, it just would never ever happen. And the fact that we have the technology available to us now to be able to deliver events like this, that's a huge part of it as well, isn't it? You know, you couldn't have contemplated running an event of this nature 15, 20 years ago because we didn't have the physical hardware to be able to deliver it. It's a great time that we're living in when we can take the technology that we've got and actually use that to create these simple but really unique events.
Absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree. And you'll notice from our portfolio of shows that the names tend to be self-descriptive. The Rock Orchestra, silent discos in incredible places, and that's no accident. Being able to convey quite a simple idea really neatly and succinctly in a way that where people see that marketing and they instantly understand what it is and they're interested in the idea is very effective.
And I really wanted to ask today, and it could, but this could, you could say no to this, and it's a really short question, but is everything that you do your own events, or given what you've created as a business and the infrastructure that you've now got, do you take on third-party events now as an organizer? Do you work with clients who may come to you and say, look, we really want your expertise in helping deliver an event for us, be that corporate, you know, brand, etc., etc.?
So we do collaborate with people, and I certainly have done in the past, and we're continuing to do that. It's really important to us, and you know, over the last 15 years, we've really defined the business model that is most effective for our ambitions.
Mhm.
And so, if we're going to collaborate with people, it must fit into that. Staying disciplined in business is really important. Of course, there are so many opportunities everywhere, but it's being able to identify what the best one is that suits your skill set, and then having the discipline to say, no, that is what we do. And if it's outside of that, it's a distraction.
Mm.
So yes, we are actively working with other people to produce new shows right now. Actually, some really exciting ones, but they fit within our business model of highly scalable touring that we feel can have a big distribution globally.
Amazing. And how long have the actual space that you're in itself? And again, I mentioned very early on in today's episode that we'll put up the website and stuff, and everybody go and check out the Mega Events website after you've listened or watched today's episode. But you're in a great physical space to run the business in kind of northwest West London, and there's a great kind of drone video and stuff. And how long has your sort of physical space where you operate from been in existence and been part of the business?
We've been here for about 4 years now, and so I mean, actually, it was when COVID hit. We didn't have much to do, but we wanted to remain really proactive. We had offices just off of Portobello Road, and then we had warehouses down in Bristol. And the vision was to have a large multi-purpose space where we could go from conceptualizing something to building it to rehearsing it all under one roof. And I think in terms of just the different departments within the company, everyone actually being able to see what was being worked on, just in terms of the synergy and the understanding of what we're all trying to achieve, just it got so much more direct that
Yeah.
it just had huge advantages throughout the rest of the company.
It must be amazing for staff to actually see, and I guess with the size of business you're on, I don't know how many staff are working from the office permanently, but when you've got people that may be working in an indirect way to the actual ultimate, the end show, for them to be able to see the costumes, hear the performance, witness some of the rehearsals and production rehearsals, for somebody who's maybe working in accounts or in admin, to be able to see that must, from an employment point of view, offer a certain level of incentive to think, wow, this is great. What a great company I'm working for.
Definitely. And, ultimately what we do is really exciting, is really fun. And we create these things that we're all really proud of. And certainly when the offices and the warehouses were not in the same building, so often people were, you could really sense that people either didn't understand what we do, or they'd forget, because it's very easy to, and it's not anywhere, out of sight, out of mind. So it's lovely to be able to have everybody being able to embrace that and experience that, and constantly remind everyone, what we're up to and what we're trying to achieve.
Absolutely. And as we kind of wrap up and look towards the end of today's episode, again, if I'm right in reading some of the stats that were sent to me in advance, you're looking at 120 dates this year for the Rock Orchestra in the USA alone, potentially. I mean, that's. I mean, my maths might not be great, but that's over 2 shows a week in the USA. That's some undertaking, and presumably has required you to have maybe not a base as such, but you must have in terms of manpower, a permanent presence over in the USA now to even contemplate undertaking that amount of dates.
Yeah. So the rolling team in the USA we'll do like 5 shows a week, 2 days off, but
Right.
then we take the summer off.
Right.
And what the touring party looks like is 2 tour buses and a big juggernaut lorry with everything in it. And day by day, they're setting up office in the individual venues or the hotels, and it is quite an operation. But moving to the USA and accessing that market, it's one of the most commercial, hungry markets in the world, if not the biggest. Was a bit of a game changer for us, and it now factors into our plans. And certainly when we're prospecting for new events and new concepts, a big question is this going to be viable in North America? Because it's just so big.
Yeah, and big is great in terms of potential revenue and the potential that it offers. But big is also big in terms of some of the costs that are associated with that, and it's a big geographical space. Keeping buses on the road and trucks on the road is an expensive thing. So you've got to be there's got to be a scale there, hasn't there? You've got to have the number of dates in there. You've got to have the tickets. You've got to know that the market's right, and geographically in terms of the demographic of how the USA is sort of split. Are there certain territories where you think there's just not going to be the audience there, and are there certain sort of cities and states where you think, yeah, there's definitely going to be not just an appetite there, but also I guess the venues and the infrastructure for you to tour economically?
Yeah, absolutely. And we approach it very much in the same way that we do in the UK and Europe. Everything is completely data focused for us. If we start to get bad data on something, then we know not to do it. But America is so huge. It's kind of like the whole of Europe just wrapped into one massive country. And there are cultural differences from north to south and east to west, and a lot to learn and to understand as you move around there. But the way that we approach that kind of scenario is that we're looking at the data, surveying it all the time, and we would know our average cost of advertising per sale, state by state as well as city by city. And you start to build a picture of where the most viable territories are, where actually it's pretty difficult, where it's extremely remote and therefore going to be difficult to get to. And over time, you get a clearer and clearer picture of what's good.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we wrap up, we've got the Mega Events website. I've sort of promised this a couple of times in today's episode for people to be able to go and check out. So I think mega-events.co.uk is the main company website, Nathan. But I presume people can go and find individual social pages and even websites for the brands that you're operating for the Rock Orchestra, for the Silent Disco and Incredible Spaces.
Absolutely. Yeah, they can indeed. And they're actually linked from the main Mega website.
Amazing. So, just to recap, everybody, we've been talking today to Nathan Reed. Nathan is the founder, the managing director of Mega Events, talking about some of the brands and the operational stuff that these guys are doing. And there's so much more. Honestly, it's one of those episodes today where, when I looked at it, I read about it, I thought this could easily be an hour and a half, 2 hour conversation going into all sorts of stuff. So it almost feels a shame sometimes when we've got a guest on and it comes to the point where we have to wrap it up. But part and parcel of that is if you're listening to this today or watching this today and you think, oh, I'd love to know a bit more about X, Y, and Z bit of the company, go and check these guys out. Go and have a little look at what they're doing. It's great to hear a success story in the industry of an organizer who's developing, conceptualizing, promoting, operating, producing their own events. So Nathan, congratulations to you and all your team over at Mega Events, and continued success to you all.
Thanks so much, James. Lovely chatting with you.
Before we wrap up today, don't forget to head over to eventindustrynews.com. If you're listening to today's podcast via your podcast platform, you can find the latest news, features, special supplements, and of course, the A to Z supplier directory. If you work in the events industry and you're looking for a product or a service, the chances are you will find it within the A to Z supplier directory over on eventindustrynews.com, where you can also find video versions of all of our podcasts. Of course, you may have started your journey there today and watched the video version of today's podcast on the website. Don't forget to have a little look around the rest of the website before you leave today, and also head over to wherever you get your audio podcasts from and make sure that you're subscribed to the podcast so that you get all the episodes as they drop. It brings us neatly and nicely to the end of today's episode. My thanks again to Nathan Reed from Mega Events for joining us out of the traps first thing on a Monday morning at the start of what inevitably will be a busy week for everybody in the industry. Stay safe out there, everybody. Good luck to you all. And Nathan, thanks very much for joining us today.
Cheers.